It was New Year's 2024, and I was out at a party with friends where one of our mutual homies was DJing. I had a few beers and smoked a backwood with about 2 grams of weed in it before coming back inside to find a homie walking around with an open backpack full of mushrooms. I live in a larger city where people don't really care, and the party was packed, probably how he avoided any penalty for this. Anyway, we are close, so he just gave me some. I took about a quarter ounce of these mushrooms at around 1:45 a.m. while sitting under one of their dining tables like a gremlin. I went about the night and everything was wonderful and fun, even going down the block a little to shotgun another beer from the gas station and check out some abandoned buildings. I came back to the party around 2:30 and I was only more packed than before, but with many more unfamiliar heads. The sidewalk was lined with random people and the building was packed, so I kinda just tucked myself by the front door as to still hear the music. Around 2:50, I heard 3 loud pops from around the corner of the venue. I ran around and saw a man I thought was no older than 20 bleeding out from the side of his skull. There was so much blood it formed into a crimson pool completely covering the curb and the panel of the sidewalk he laid on. I called the ambulance and me and my friends began administering CPR. I checked his pulse while my friend's girlfriend gave chest compressions and this man's older brother administered the breaths. As she pumped, I felt his blood move through his wrists and simultaneously push more out of the hole in his head. I remember every cry and every frantic voice saying, "Stay with me, bro, stay with me, it's gonna be okay." It's crazy, but in these moments, everything became extremely clear. It was sobering in the moment, but as the ambulance took too long to arrive and finally got him, I began sinking back into the most terrifying trip of my entire life. About 20 to 25 people from the party, all closer friends, brought me home and stayed with me for a few hours as I had a full mental breakdown and experienced a mild psychosis. I was frantically checking the windows, begging for a benzo to try to end my trip and experience this with a normal brain, but even the Xanax I took after didn't help. I went into the bathroom panicking and sat on the floor as deep blue vines with yellow eyeball-esque growths on it grew through the floor trim and cracks under the door and window. I felt consumed in a jungle of pain, and in that moment, I began frantically praying for the man and his family. After that, I looked myself in the mirror and saw my sullen face transforming from dead to alive and bleeding from my eyes. I think I was just crying, but it was terrifying in the moment. Every time I closed my eyes, I watched my childhood memories pour from my own eyes and drain into a black void. I'm talking every field trip, every partner, all the stuff that my subconscious thought was important. I know I wasn't the one shot, but I've never seen anything like this before, other than on the internet, so I believe my brain was trying to sort out the situation and definitely wasn't doing so correctly. I remember looking at myself and calmly explaining that I would never be the same after seeing something like that. I have a party room in the 2nd floor of my house, and that was where most people were, so I headed up there. I thought not being alone would help, but I began pacing frantically and asking them to stop talking and then to start because the silence was too much, to change the music and then change it back, anything in an attempt to gain control of my mental. The floor was wavy at first, but started turning into a downward spiral. I grabbed my journal and began writing an entry in broken, shaky handwriting. I didn't even want to write the details because I knew I'd have to read this back the next day, and because my paranoia had made me believe I was next, and I wanted no indication that I had the mark of death around me. I have no idea. I'm tripping off, and I saw something I've only ever seen in my nightmares and online. I feel bad to be in such a position where others care about me more than the kid who we watched carted to the hospital. Prayers to him, blessed to be here to complain. After the journal entry and more pacing and freaking out, I realized there was a complete stranger dressed in a fur coat and a bear hat talking about how much therapy she's gonna need after this. I don't know why, but the terrifying combination of a bear in my house and the thought of having to unpack and live with this memory the rest of my life made me ask everyone to leave. This was around 5 a.m. and I asked my best friend and his girlfriend if they could stay upstairs on the couch just in case I had an emergence of psychosis or some other situation arose. Truth is though, I was just paranoid and needed a tether to reality. I don't remember falling asleep, but I woke up in a puddle of tears. For weeks after the incident, I didn't go out. I was checking my windows constantly and scared every time my phone rang. I believed I was being hunted by death. I have dealt with paranoia my whole life and have managed my symptoms well up until this point, but the situation had made many of my visual hallucinations and paranoid thoughts return for a while after. Shadow people in the doorways, distorted faces in the windows, hands grabbing my ankles from under my bed, panic attacks and nightmares, the usual. I started having intense visions of my own death. First they were nightmares, but now they just flash in my head throughout the day, still dealing with this. The hospital called a mutual friend 2 days later to say that he was in critical condition for those 2 days, and that his family decided to call it after they found out he'd never speak, walk, or basically do anything anymore. I prayed every day for 3 months for his family, and part of me still feels bad that all those people were there for me and not him in those moments. Maybe more collective energy could have saved him for more than 2 days. I don't know, but all I do know is that was awful, and I can only imagine the pain that him and his family went and are going through. God, what a harrowing story that was. I actually started shaking a little bit reading that. This is my message to the writer of this story. I really hope that you find peace and that there was nothing else you could have done to help the situation more than you already did. I'm glad you're even in the right state of mind to write out your terrifying experience in my Reddit community. I know how tough that must have been, but I hope typing it up and me reading it on the channel has made you feel slightly better, even if it was only a minor improvement. Now, this is my message to everyone who is still watching. Let's all come together as a community in support of this person. Let's all come together as a community to support this person. I see hate comments, not a lot as most are positive, all the time on every video I upload making fun of the tripper in the story. This though was simply out of their control, and even if they weren't on shrooms, it would still be a pretty terrifying experience, but more so since the shrooms are such a mind-altering drug. Everyone, I ask you to leave a positive message that this person could take with them for the foreseeable future, so it's easier to cope with the tragic event that happened that day. I am not done here though, as someone else commented a story about how their dad witnessed something similar while also tripping on shrooms. It would be nice to also give positive messages to the commenter's dad, and maybe they can show them that there are tons of people who support him. I know I can rely on you all to do this because this community is extremely loving and understanding, and I'm grateful for that every single day. Alright, let's read this last story. This story reminded me of a story my dad told me from when he was in his 20s. Him and some buddies took large doses of mushrooms he was growing and selling at the time. Anyway, one of those buddies had a mental break and attempted suicide by very deeply slitting his wrists. He said as soon as he saw the wounds, it was like reality stopped. He dissociated hardcore and believed he was in a movie and saw the blood and exposed fat and tissue as shitty gore effects from an old horror movie. He said he reached out to touch it out of curiosity before another friend slapped his hand away. Luckily, someone there had it together enough to get the dude to the hospital. This whole group of dudes on high doses of mushrooms spent the remainder of their trip in the hospital waiting room, hoping to hear any news about their friend. They were all having a collective breakdown, freaking out. They all thought he had died, as I believe he was unconscious when they arrived to the hospital. He survived, but ended up taking his life some years later, but it affected my dad deeply and still does to this day. He felt deeply depressed after this trip and was so for months after. His friend was never really the same. My dad didn't touch psychedelics for years after that. When he did again, he spent his whole trip having extreme suicidal thoughts. He had it set in his mind that he had to take his own life. Luckily, he had a friend there who spent 4 to 5 hours talking him out of it. These days he can trip again in peace. I introduced him to DMT and he loves it, but that's a different story. The story maybe doesn't fit here, but this reminded me of it as it's not too often you hear stories of people encountering real horrible things happening while tripping. Even just someone being sad when I'm tripping is enough to deeply affect me. I cannot imagine something like that. I found myself in some less than ideal situations while on psychedelics that have left pretty serious scars, but something like this would ruin me entirely. It's important to remember that you could not have done anything to save him. Wrong place, very wrong time. What happened was out of you or any of your friends' control. Don't beat yourself up over it. You should not feel any guilt after this experience, but the fact that you are tells me you're a kind and caring soul. I'm just going to read the last 2 comments that the original poster replied with, and then we'll end the video and hopefully not be traumatized. Thank you for sharing your story and your kind words. I go to therapy weekly when I can fit it in my schedule, and have found some great coping mechanisms for the intrusive thoughts and nightmares, but I think some of this imagery is going to take a long time to go away. You are right though, I think it's time I stop torturing myself with the idea of not saving him, and just be grateful to have given his family enough time to say their goodbyes. Thank you so much. Also, the self-harm aspect of this story is super scary because one individual's struggle can become a collective experience under that kind of psychedelic environment, and I'm just glad nobody else was injured. But my condolences to your father, as it sounds like even if it was long after, your dad lost a good friend to mental health, and nobody deserves that pain, internal or external. My experience with BK2CB happened during one of the rougher periods of my life. While studying at university, I've been struggling to keep up with responsibilities and my own personal issues. In order to deal with the stress and unhappiness that comes with financial issues, losing friends, abusive exes, etc., I'd been drinking about 1 liter of vodka a day for 3 months preceding this experience. I had only gotten into drugs about 1 year before this experience. It was only occasional use initially, but then the frequency of my use had increased to maybe twice a month, and also trying loads of different drugs. Working at a nightclub and simultaneously studying at university gives rise to me being very tired all the time. Just before this trip, I hadn't slept for 1.5 days or eaten for a day or so. The experience began on a Saturday at 4 a.m. 4 friends and I, after finishing a decent shift at work, went back with P to his house. We regularly go back to someone's for drinking and hanging out at this time. Arriving around 5, we began drinking. I had my faithful liter bottle of vodka with me. The others had their own alcohol, which we all shared. Between 6 and 7, R took some of P's MDMA and started rolling, followed by Q, who also took some MDMA for her first time. We did the usual, being ridiculous with each other, listening to music, chatting, laughing, the usual. Then I asked P for some MDMA and did a 0.2 gram line. Pretty quickly I was rolling with R and Q. Our situation became classic for that of an entactogen. We were hugging, very nice things were said, chatting absolute quality high-grade shit. Eventually we looked out the window and the sun had risen, suggesting we ought to look at the time. It was 1 p.m. After a cigarette, we purchased more alcohol, went to my house and grabbed a few things. One of our friends left around this point. The remaining returned to P's, whose housemates were very irritated with the noise we had been making. Took BK2CB here. P, R, and I then took some amphetamine to help stay awake at some time in the early afternoon while Q slept. I had 0.1 grams in a bomb and took it without fluid. Content with the buzz we felt, the chilling continued for an hour or so. I can't remember whose idea it was, ours or mine, to take some BK2CB next. However, R then took a 0.1 gram bomb of BK2CB with water. He turned to offer me the water, but I had already taken my 0.14 gram bomb without anything. Side note, apparently BK2CB forms inactive dimers in water/alkali solutions, so this may explain why R didn't trip, according to online sources. The rest of the day was entirely devoted to silliness. I wasn't paying attention to the effects of the BK2CB, which we called BCath, and before I knew it, we were taking a second bomb of it, each that R had prepared containing 60 to 80 milligrams. So I had taken somewhere around 0.2 to 0.22 grams of BK2CB, a research chemical of which nothing is known about other than what has been gained from subjective reports of effects, like this one. I started tripping balls and having a nice time. We were picking up objects and pretending they were phones to each other from across the room, addressing each other as doctor, followed by the name of the object they were using as a phone. Imaginary medical conditions were flung around the room, and they were urgently referred higher to Dr. Ceiling. Perception of my surroundings changed as everything began breathing and colors were much brighter. Thought processes were quite disjointed and fast-moving. Ridiculous quotes started being uttered. For the rest of the day, I was incapable of saying anything normal. Not that unusual for me, to be honest. For quite a long stretch of time, I was on R's back as we wandered around outside, and everyone started referring to me as Tabitha, my issued nickname. Someone came into one of those houses next door with their bike to see me tripping balls on R's back. I greeted him by saying, "Hello there, I'm the ostrich," whilst I was whispering into R's ear about how P is actually a robot. I went in for a shower. During this time, Q had woken up. I ended up sat on P's bed and only a towel next to Q, who turned to me asking, "Tabby, why are we naked?" Followed by a search for our clothes and getting dressed in the other room. Effects of the BK2CB became more apparent once back in P's room. It was cold outside. It must have been around 4:30 at this point. My pupils had been fully dilated for a long time. I was sat in a chair gazing at R. He's slim, tall, and has really nice, medium-length black, side-fringed hair. I began to see tracers. These tracers were of R's face and arm mostly, seeing fairly short-lasting multicolored imprints of him left behind on a canvas-like background as he moved. Someone, I'm unsure as to whom, took their hat off and sat down in a funny way, leading to R and me coining the phrase "hatting out." We were all just sat around, hatting out. Over the course of the next few hours, I began getting worked up as we had shifts that evening, earliest of which was mine. None of us had slept or eaten, and we were on drugs. Well, I was the only one on anything really considerable at this point. R spent the next few hours trying to get me work ready as I began to freak out. Shivers go down my spine even as I type this because of the anxiety I felt due to the thought of losing my job, which I absolutely love. Q and R left, so P and I tried a nap before work. I had such intense closed-eye visuals of indescribable mosaic art that appeared to be growing, accompanied by auditory hallucinations of creaking wood. After an unspecified amount of time, I gave up on sleep. P got up with me. I had no shoes on, and it was raining outside in the pitch-black darkness. P lent me some shoes that were far too big. I was sick, and then P joined me to go back to my house. Unfortunately, all three of my housemates that I keep my lifestyle a secret from were in the only communal area. I am also very paranoid and anxious in my house on a normal day, let alone just before work whilst I'm tripping balls, and don't want them to know about it. People's faces looked as if the computer program Fun Photo Booth effects were being applied onto them in real life. For example, the faces were curling in on themselves and moving around with the motion of a lava lamp. Streams of colors flowed like rivers in the background. I hallucinated that people who weren't in the room were sat next to me, talking. I was so paranoid that I thought they had a routine scheduled for when I bring a friend into the house. I genuinely believed they were carrying out this rehearsed routine in front of me, when in reality they were all sat around talking and making dinner. P left. One of the housemates went upstairs and I couldn't handle what was happening. I started crying. I didn't want to lose my job. I told them about some general issues that were occurring in my life, then was cut short as I had to leave for work. On the way to the bus stop, I changed my mind as I didn't even recognize my own neighborhood. My housemates kindly called work for me, who demanded to speak to me. I pleaded with work, saying I was ill through tears, but was told I had to be in, so I agreed to try and help. They asked me to message when I was on my way, which I couldn't even do as my phone and laptop were broken and I had lost my wallet. Yes, my life was a bit of a mess. Again, I changed my mind on the way to the bus stop because I didn't want to get in trouble with the law. This is where the trip becomes nightmarish. I become so paranoid and delusional about the law getting involved. I was so fucked that I couldn't form sentences, find the light switch in my bedroom, or even put a jumper on. Convinced that I would lose my job and that the law was going to catch up with me, I frantically tried to come up with a solution to the problem. The housemates came in to find me crouching in my washing basket, topless, skinny jeans halfway off, still had underwear on luckily, while I was skitzing out. Closest of my housemates, S, clothed me. I was so far gone. I turned to them, tears running down my face, having a nervous breakdown, and said, "It's game over. There's only one way out," as I thought I was going to ruin their lives by losing them the house and getting everyone kicked off of their university courses. Completely delusional. This carried on for about an hour. I then attempted an escape to jump in front of a car on the main road. Fortunately, the housemate stopped me from killing myself by disallowing me to leave my room. Since I had just announced I was suicidal in that moment, an ambulance was called by a housemate who had clocked that I was on drugs. Paramedics came in, and the other two housemates, being innocently naive as they are, bless, were only then realizing that I was on drugs, tripping balls. The paramedics proceeded to raid my room, finding all my hospital forms and illicit drugs. They took a sample of my blood and detected amphetamine, MDMA, MDA, ketamine, BK2CB, plus a few others. So obviously, the sources of our drugs were not producing pure powders. The effects of the drugs and aversive situation became far too overwhelming at this point. I was unable to speak or walk and got strapped into some unidentifiable contraption as the tripping was so intense I couldn't recognize anything. Forgetting what my face looked like, unable to think, I just waited as from my perspective, everything was brought to me. Being carried from the ambulance into the waiting room of the hospital, I was left leaning on S's shoulder. For the next couple of hours, I couldn't think or speak, and I had a bad case of tinnitus, as well as an extremely high, uncomfortable body load. There is a block of memory missing for I don't know how long at this point. While I was out of it in the waiting room, all I heard was a short, looped conversation where a few of my friends' voices were talking about me in the background. S was the only friend with me. The voices were saying that all Tabs does is drugs, they have no interest in anything else, that kind of thing. Hours whilst in this state passed, I felt like I was never going to return from the trip. S started singing to me. After about an hour or so, I picked up on it and sung a lyric or two back at her. Then my fingers were the point of focus, so S tried to deduce what I was trying to say. Eventually, I started saying hi back to her when she waved at me. A depressing moment was when I turned to her and, with my voice that was messed up from a cold and all the alcohol, asked her, "S, will this ever end?" Each time I looked away and looked back at her, I perceived a completely different person being sat next to me. After a while, I regained my ability to speak and I managed to get up. I was back in the room. Following my regained ability to move, I wandered around the wards and waiting rooms with one shoe on, trying to talk and joke around with the staff and other patients as if they were on drugs too. Normally, I'm an incessant chatterbox, so I had a lot of not talking time to make up for. I was taken into several rooms, but tripping too hard still to be of any use to any available medical professionals. My heart and blood pressure were scanned a few times. In the waiting room on my chair, next to a wall, I hallucinated a person opening a door right next to me. Streams of colors were still flowing, as well as cloud-like outlines of colors floating in the air as a vapor. They were almost tangible. After 5 hours of me chatting shit, a group of big, angry goth girls got very irritated with me. I'm quite skinny, and any one of them could have beaten the shit out of me on a good day, let alone when I had overdosed, not eaten or slept in days. I was on the verge of throwing up. They threatened to punch me and beat me up, at which point security came over to sort it out, which was good because if I had received a punch, I would have immediately vomited. There was also a group of guys, roughly my age range, 18 to 20, who were there because one of their friends had tripped over and knocked themselves out. They were on ketamine and were asking how much I had taken to be in my state. I even chatted to them about why I was there and my issues, to which he replied saying, "It's okay, no one cares." He then started hitting on me. S had definitely had enough and asked me to sit next to her, so I put all that on hold. Expending all my energy being ridiculous in the waiting rooms left me incredibly weak. That and my arms were in pain from all the needles. I had to ask S to lift a cup of water to my mouth to hydrate me because I was so thirsty. I was so thankful for everything she did. I was as pale as a ghost, my lips were so blue, and my pupils were enormous with an almost undetectable blue iris outline. After 11 hours of waiting in the hospital, well into Sunday morning, after having wires and needles put into and taken out of me, I was seen by a psychologist. Fortunately, my skinny jeans had knee slits in them so they could put sticky stuff on my knees, otherwise I might have had to wear one of the dreaded hospital gowns. I've been referred to a rehab center, doctor's surgery, counseling at my university, and a psychiatrist for everything. Moral of the story? I'm sure there's one in there somewhere. I hope no one has to experience something like this. I actually enjoyed the tripping effects. Obviously, I took too much for me. I have a fairly low mass as well, and in the past have shown relatively sensitive reactions to psychedelics when compared with my friends. Actual streams of colors that had bodies, as in defined outlines like riverbanks containing the colors which flowed in multiple directions as a liquid were perceived. This filled the background of my visual field. People looked prettier, smoother. People's faces when close to mid-range away from me were morphing a lot. All objects were breathing. However, this came in waves. I generally felt happier whilst on it. Tracers were seen briefly. I got full-blown hallucinations, usually of other people who weren't there who spoke to me. The trip was quite gentle for a while, but then, for me, it had quite a sudden peak which lasted for a long time. Returning to baseline was slow. I got massive headaches and a harsh come down Sunday night through Monday night, still washed out and very tired half a week later. Any of these effects could have been mediated by other drugs in my system other than BK2CB. However, none of them are typical of any other drugs I was on. So I've been upset about something lately, and I've been just getting super high to escape it, and lately it's been working for real. I feel pretty gone even when I'm not high, knowing I could just hit my dab pen and feel good again. I would smoke weed, but I can't at my house, and I can't sneak out and just smoke it either because I would need to smoke multiple times. I also apologize if these words are disorganized. I still feel mildly stupid from the dose. Not in a debilitating way though, just a good way I guess. But the weekend prior to Monday, I was out of money, my cart was almost out, and I was super pissed about something. At this point, I don't remember what, so clearly I got what I wanted. So I had remembered seeing a big white field on a drive home one day, and I had seen a field like that before back in the summer with all the flowers, so I walked on the highway all the way back to the spot. I knew exactly how to get there, and only took about 30 minutes, and when I did get there, I noticed all the flowers were cut. I don't know if they harvest them or something, but I would have tried one of them too. I walked over to a point of the fenced-in field where some of the pods were sticking out, and I picked about 5, and just walked and wandered off for about 2 hours, getting stoned, feeling super content with my next few days. Eventually, my phone was almost dead, and I was thirsty, so I walked back home. Yes, I remember now this was the night before the night I'm about to write about. I got home and just dove right in. I don't know how high I got this night, but I know for a fact I got high because I got the annoying dry mouth that everyone talks about. I know now I did because of the guy staring at me in my closet, which I for some reason rationalized as real, and a homeless kid my age who was just having a hard time with his parents or something and wanted somewhere to chill. So I figured he had climbed into my open window, and then I remembered him doing it, which I hadn't before. A few times I would ask him, "Are you real?" And I would glance at him, and he would appear to move nothing but his eye to stare at me for about 4 seconds. Then he would look away as to try to avoid all conversation, even though he knew I knew. I just gave up and didn't want to be a dick, I guess. I really don't know what the fuck made me think this was okay. I'm going through a hard time with loneliness, admittedly, and at one point, his girlfriend crawled through the window. She had short pink hair, pajama pants, and a hoodie, and they were pressing their heads up against each other. This made me angry. "I'm sorry, but you guys are gonna have to go," I said to them, but they both just glanced over with their eyes momentarily and glanced back at each other and said and did nothing. So I just gave up and didn't really know what to do because I didn't want to wake up the house and let them know people were there. Then I would be more fucked in case they caught me. But also, side note, right here, right now, I just noticed I still have minor Datura visuals, which is just everything I stare at is breathing. But after a few attempts, I gave up and laid in my bed to face them so I could look up every now and then to check on them so they didn't steal anything. I thought they knew I took Datura, and they were taking advantage of me being high so I couldn't react in case they were fake and my parents would find out, and at one point they started to smoke something. I can't tell if it was cigarettes or weed, but I told them, "You can't smoke that in here." Then I have memory of one more person being there, although I don't quite remember what features they had, which gender they were, or what role they played in the events happening, but they all seemed to be laughing and having a good time ignoring me. I don't remember much past this. This was a more chilled out night. I woke up the next morning, and well, of course, I took a bunch of Datura seeds. I also drank coffee and had some wax hits before I started my day. Of course I did. Am I in control of myself anymore? I really don't know anymore, man. But yep, it got me feeling about how I wanted to, not be delirious, but stuck stoned, and nothing really happened through the day other than probably me laying down playing guitar arguing with my parents. But when night came, I do particularly remember ingesting more seeds than I usually do. I already had a few days of previous seeds in me, plus the seeds I had taken earlier that day. This was when I got slapped with delirium, or at least my first experience with it. Might I say, scarily fun. I'm not gonna go into it about the dry mouth and the gravity pulling you down feeling, cause you guys already know all about that, but it is the first sign of the trip. Some kid, I don't know what he was associated with, but he seemed short, unconfident, and sad, and he took a hit from a blunt in some weird dissociative roto in my head. And when he got the blunt, he hit it, and he began to seize up and fell on the ground by my bed, and I didn't know what to do. I realized this kid was having a seizure and needed help, so I ran out into my living room to try to do something to help him, which I had no clue about. This is about when the confusion began. I didn't realize this was the trip anymore. These were real events happening that got in the way of me enjoying my trip. What I didn't realize though was something along the lines of me taking my phone out of my case, me getting confused and dropping everything in my hands, then looking on the ground and seeing nothing but my phone screen chilling there. Not even how the actual screen is, like just straight up a piece of rectangular glass with my phone on it. So I had to put it in my case to use it, which was very wonky and confusing, but I could just barely make out what I was doing on my phone. I was texting people, lots of people had texted me too, and then I remember dropping the handheld phone case contraption on my bed. I tried to pick up my screen, but it was just a ghost. I figured I needed to really push my fingers under it to get it, but I just couldn't. Then the screensaver function or whatever, the one that shuts your screen off, turned the screen off, and it disappeared into nothing. This freaked me out, and for some reason I had the idea I could make a new phone by cutting construction paper and piling it up underneath a cutout piece of plastic bag, all to fit into my phone case, which I tried to tape. All of this which I was trying to do was poorly coordinated, so I ended up cutting these shapes so many times. I don't remember exactly how much, but I know for sure I was making lots of noise, but I didn't care. I needed my phone. The contraption worked, although it was very flimsy and I had a hard time typing my passcode as the screen was crumbled up and crinkled with the plastic bag shape, so it was hard to type on. I don't remember what I was doing on my phone though. At this point, I also noticed the couple was back and watching my confusion. I also began talking to a friend who wasn't there, and in that moment, it was very hard to tell whether my speech was in my head or coming out of my mouth. I felt very stuck and like my speech was going to another plane. I could not tell where I was hearing it. I had been drinking from a jug of water all night, which really doesn't relieve anything, but I figured I'd do it to be safe, and I went out. This is about where my events lose track, and I have no idea what order these occurred, but I'll give brief moments I seem to be intrigued enough to remember them. I remember walking out of my room with clothes, I don't know why, and I started to put clothes into the dishwasher. I don't know if this was a hallucination, but I have a weird memory of finding a bottle with 20 milligrams of DXM, and I took that, and I also remember finding a piece of plastic paper with a tab in it, which I licked off the paper and took it. I have no idea whether this was real or not. My room was a mess and I didn't remember why. I was looking for things like an insane man all night. At some points I didn't know what I was looking for. I was just looking for something. I remember seeing these tiny clear geometric rainbow spiders which generated sparkles that floated weightlessly around my guitar's fretboard while I played like jellyfish, and they crawled like spiders when they managed to touch down on the fretboard, but they couldn't for long. They would float back up in the air. This made me smile and feel really warm inside. Their legs looked like wobbly electricity that glowed a little bit. I was having audio hallucinations of repetitive sounds and some kind of distant radio station. I couldn't make out what they were saying, along with my mom yelling every now and then. I knew this was fake though for some reason. In the morning, I don't know if I had slept or not yet, but I was still hallucinating hard. While it was still dark, I remember going downstairs into my basement by myself and finding my grandmother alone. Dead, just sitting there, cold and lifeless. It looked like she had been extremely sad and alone before she died. Why this didn't freak me out? I have no idea. I didn't know what to do, but for some reason I wasn't having an appropriate reaction. I just felt oblivious. At some point, I ended up approaching her again, and when I poked her, it turned out to be an arrangement of clothing and cloth for her white hair, which again I reacted to like a stone wall, like an observer. And this hallucination would keep repeating itself with my animals all night. They would be sitting, wagging their tail, and I would walk up close to them, but the closer I got to them, the more they stopped moving until I would get to them and they would be dead, wrinkly, and cold to the touch, and this would make me really sad, but then it would turn out just to be clothes. At some point when I woke up from whenever the fuck I went to sleep, I took more seeds and smoked and felt content with how high I was, unaware I was still tripping, and thought it would be okay to interact with my mom. Damn, what a bad idea. According to her, my words were severely disorganized. I kept talking about an elephant in the room and getting ready for school when she kept asking me what I was on, because my pupils were still huge and I was making no sense, and neither did my actions. I had no idea what was going on, although I thought I did in the moment. I kept seeing my dad walk into my room without talking to me and collapsing on my bed similar to how a bored teenager would, and I would ask him if he was okay, and he would shrug his shoulders. This happened 3 times, until one time my mom was talking to me asking me if I was on something, to which I kept saying no and then branching off into completely unrelated things. After my mom told me she was taking me to the hospital, I don't know what made me think I was coming down, but I thought I was. I guess because I didn't know the whole phone thing was a delusion yet, but I searched my cabinets and found to my surprise 10 25mg Benadryl tablets and took the whole bottle. My mom found 3 bags of Datura seeds and these weird Benadryl pills. Well, not Benadryl, they just had DPH in them. She asked what they were. I told her Benadryl. She didn't believe me, so she took them, the bags, and me to the hospital. I don't know if I was hallucinating, but the people in front of me were just smoking a blunt in the hospital waiting room, and this was funny to me. I asked my mom to go to the bathroom, and so I did. Feeling like a champ, I took a DPH pill I had in my pocket for some reason without any water, and smacked my card a bunch, then went out into the waiting room again. Not much to talk about in the hospital, just normal hospital shit. I was hooked up, all that shit. None of this turned the trip bad at all, mind you. The whole thing was a blast. In fact, I had to make sure my mom or the doctors didn't know how much fun I was having. My last hallucinations were me using a water bottle on the bed as my phone. My mom kept trying to tell me my phone wasn't there, but I wouldn't stop trying to text. I thought I was actually texting people. I thought I was doing something magic. What ended the trip officially was getting home and finding out my phone had never fallen out of the case. It never broke, and every text or anything I said to anyone was completely hallucinated. I got back home that night and did more seeds. This time just got high. I'm off my binge now, but can say I still feel pleasant and like it's easy to zone off. Everything appears to be breathing right now as I look around like on the come up, except I don't have the dry mouth, which is nice. Overall, Datura is a very confusing high. You won't notice most of your delusions are actually delusions. Be careful with it. But as for my opinion, I love it. Damn, I love it. I love the audio hallucinations. I love the adrenaline. I love the gravity pulling you down when you walk. I love the rainbow spiders, and that extreme headspace was completely free. Would I do it again? Absolutely. If you're going to try it, stay very hydrated, piss as much as you can, have some kind of reality check just in case, and you'll have a blast. THC helps too. Nowhere near as scary as people make it out to be. Trust me. What I have done may be stupid and was a dumb decision to make, but what is done is done. One day after shopping with my parents, I grabbed a plastic shopping bag from the back of my car, stuffed it in my pocket, and proceeded to have a normal day up until 10 p.m. At 10 p.m. I was drinking alcohol, not alone though. I had a friend over, let's call him W. About 4 shots of liquor, and after 20 minutes, I was feeling tipsy. I then had another 6 shots to have fun. W was sober, and we just talked about life. It was a cool and rainy night. The rain was loud on the roof, which drowned out the sound of our conversation, so my parents couldn't hear us. My alcohol was stored for an occasion where I wanted to get shit-faced drunk and fucked up. I was drunk, really drunk. Everything was lagging and in slow motion, as I felt every aspect of my physical body suppressed by the alcohol. I was in the bedroom with W, and I was thinking of what to do while I'm feeling drunk. I didn't want to do any activities like watching movies or playing video games because I don't enjoy them sober, so I wouldn't enjoy them drunk. I was bored and remembered the plastic shopping bag I had. I had recently been to a college class where the topic of inhalants was brought up for some reason. The teacher handed me a book called A Retailer's Response to Inhalants, and it was a book talking about how people sniff and inhale substances such as glue, paint, and even petrol, and the book even mentioned that it causes hallucinations. After reading this, I was instantly intrigued. I told W everything, and at the time I didn't know he was knowledgeable about inhalants. W, being sober and bored, encouraged me to try it. Being 18 with no connection to dealers and nothing other than alcohol, said fuck it, let's try something new. It was about 11:30 p.m. or something when we snuck out the bedroom and got out of the house. My dad had a gasoline can in a tray outside of his shed. I had noticed it before, and now I wanted to try it for the sake of a new experience. It might be fun, or at least give us something to do while we stay up. So I had the plastic shopping bag in my hand, and W followed me giggling through the rain, and we had to use a flashlight because it was so dark. W started hyping up what we were about to do, try inhalants for the first time. He said, I have heard of people huffing inhalants, and they had a crazy 3-minute high that is unlike any drug they did. We got to the gas can in the tray outside the shed, and now that we were here, I gave W the flashlight. He started preparing the plastic shopping bag for huffing, and I unscrewed the cap of the gas can, let it hang loose, and peered into the large half-empty gas can. I asked W how much we should pour in, and he said about 1/4 of the can. I picked it up. It was not too heavy, but when I picked it up, I brought it to my chest and hugged it with both arms because I wanted to. The cap was unscrewed and I smelt the gasoline strongly and was thinking how excited I am to hallucinate, even though I am doing an inhalant, which after the events of the story took place, I learned is one of the worst types of drugs you can do. I had this thought before pouring what I thought was almost half a liter of gasoline in the plastic shopping bag. I put the gas back down. I sat on the cold, slightly wet floor outside the shed with the rain coming down and it being too dark to see outside of the flashlight beam. W took one sniff from the bag. He stuck his head in, breathed once, and then came back out. He said he felt the gas go into his nose and burned it, but he also felt lightheaded like he just hit a vape. He passed me the shopping bag. At this point, gasoline was dripping from the bottom of it. I made sure not to get any on my clothes. I held it by the neck of the back, as I like to call it, and impulsively stuck my head in the bag and took a few deep huffs through my mouth. And after I took my head up from the bag, my lungs felt warm and I could feel the nasty tasting solvent fumes leave my mouth and lungs. It was at this point things started to change. My vision starts to gain effects. For one, a heat shimmering type visual over everything. The contrast of my colors go up. Everything is dark apart from the flashlight. W looks like a tall, dark figure looming over me. Every object in my vision seems to be moving slightly in and out of position. I stuck my head back in the bag and kept huffing. I took 6 huffs, and when I finished huffing, I looked up and W said, "You've had your face down in that bag for 20 seconds. Are you okay?" As I lifted my head from the bag, my frame rate drops. A numbing buzz fills my head, and it seems like the effects of the alcohol are getting stronger. I see flicks and flickering of faint visuals. Hard to make out what colors they were, but they were defining my visual field. There was a loud ringing noise in my eyes. I start to feel an intense tingling feeling in my back, almost in my bones, and it spread to my head, and the warm, pleasurable effects came on harder. It felt like my body and the sound I was hearing was stretching and shrinking. I yell out to W that the trip has started. My vision is swirling, like the flashlight being shown on me feels like it's encompassing my being, and the particles in the air, which were thin lines that were moving all over. I thought I was stationary, but my mind was fucked. I tried to form a sentence, but I just started making weird noises and babbling. I was making very jumbled and slurred sentences to W, but I could not speak any straighter. I felt euphoric and was hallucinating. The audio hallucinations consisted of sound stretching and sounding further away, and a humming buzzing sound that just got louder and louder. The visual hallucinations were that everything was blurry, and the heat shimmering type visual to it as if it was moving slightly in and out of position. The tingling in my brain was so intense and pleasurable, I just wanted to get higher and higher. All I wanted was to keep huffing, so I did. I stuck my head back in and huffed the gas bag for a long time. I took 9 huffs from it, and this is where I started to lose control and function. I stopped laughing. W grabbed the bag from me and said, "You've been huffing too much. You could pass out from lack of oxygen," according to him. After this, my eyes went wide open, and he was of course still shining the light on me. My brain went blank after that. I forgot where I was and what I was doing, just staring at the waving, shimmering floor. Then the high-pitched buzzing sound morphed into what I thought were whispers and deep voices telling me that this is heaven. The voices said if you want to stay, keep huffing. These voices were loud and I started bugging out, fell back on the concrete, started drooling, and I thought my eyes were rolling into the back of my head, which they were as W pointed it out. At this point, I think he didn't want me to have a bad experience, so he refrained from calling the emergency number. W told me, "You're going to be fine," which I heard in a slow and somewhat distorted voice. I recognized his voice though over the loud ringing sounds and other voices in my head. I closed my eyes overwhelmed. I felt uneasy and my brain had a hard time thinking about anything in fact. I saw a fully white and gray light covering my vision, and there were small individual particles that were moving slightly in all directions, with different shades of gray across a semi-bright background. I tried to move but could not. I was still either tripping or zoning out. I eventually moved my legs and slurred some crap to W, and I didn't even know what I said. I was a little fearful and uneasy. I moved my arms but couldn't feel my body as if it was normal. My body just felt numb and way different. The ringing noises were slightly quieter now, but the visual hallucinations were going strong. W told me, "Let's go, no more for now," and grabbed my hand which felt numb. He tried to get me to stand up, but I fell on my ass, which happened in slow motion and my head was pounding. He left me for 10 minutes, took the bag of dripping gasoline with him. The hallucinations slowed down, became more subtle, and I felt a little less delirious. I still felt numb and didn't move at all and observed the ringing noises and visual drifting effects until W returned without the bag. He grabbed me by the arms and attempted to stand me up, which I could manage, but not without stumbling. He walked with me to the house and I stumbled there like a severely inebriated person. W said to me, "You had an intense trip and I want to give some to my other friends. I wrapped 3 towels around the bag and I'm going to take it to a party, maybe sell it or at least huff with friends if they want it." I could not make sense of this, but somehow remembered in my stupor. I stumbled through the door, crashing into it and making noise. I was wet and collapsed on the bed, feeling intoxicated and numb. No more hallucinations, but it was at this point I could speak again and told W I would like to try inhalants again for the intense rush it gave me. I had no access to other drugs apart from alcohol and solvents at this point. W had to leave the next day. I waited until the next time my parents were away, and beforehand I went to the mall to get a bag. When I was home alone, it was daytime, and I snuck to the shed and repeated the same foul method W did, with the gasoline dripping from the bottom of the shopping bag. I did it again sitting on the grass, so when the gas drips from the bottom of the bag, it won't be evidence to my parents. Yeah, right. I took 4 deep huffs, and the trip started again. The visuals were certainly better during the day. I enjoyed the hallucinations for a bit until my older brother rocked up in his car. He was 19 and I was 18. While I was huffing the gas, I could not make out any features of his face, and everything was moving like a liquid, and he asked why I was reeking of gasoline. I slurred something, and my brother responded with, "You know huffing can cause brain damage. It can make you a vegetable." He took the gasoline bag from me, and I was slurring a little bit, but I put all my concentration into demanding back the drug and told him it's my choice and I can do whatever I want. He looked shocked and upset and handed me the disgusting dripping bag back. I begged him not to tell my parents I was huffing. He said he wouldn't, but I would have to hide it. He left me to my business and went inside. I was more than a little stressed by the encounter and scared about my parents potentially finding out. I wanted to keep huffing. I took a few small huffs and didn't do too much because I didn't want to stop functioning and pass out. I observed the liquid shimmering trees, and after I sobered up again, I threw it in the trash. Next time I plan of huffing, I will stick my nose in the can, but if my addiction continues, it will get harder and harder to hide what I am doing. I took a shower after, and later in the day my parents noticed I was slower than usual and had delayed responses like everything was harder than it was before because I could have killed a few brain cells. My emotions felt a bit more deadened, and I don't have much desire other than to consume alcohol and inhalants. It took me 2 weeks to write up this report and 1 week to fix up the spelling mistakes. I eventually realized many people think inhalants are dangerous, and even though they can be scary, I just hate being sober and honestly don't know what will happen to me in the next few months. Will I get brain damage from solvent abuse, and will I ever function without inhalants or alcohol ever again? In late 2007 or early 2008, I was referred to a neurologist and was prescribed Neurontin, Gabapentin, for severe neuropathic pain. While I've never been diagnosed with a specific condition, I've struggled with severe nerve pain, insomnia, as well as depression and other symptoms. When I started Neurontin, they had tried about 8 other meds on me over the years, Cymbalta, Effexor, Elavil, and others, both to help with the depression, nerve pain, anxiety, and everything else. Nothing worked, and the doctor suggested Gabapentin. I was desperate and at the time thought it was a relatively safe medication. Immediately, I noticed an improvement in my nerve pain, and I continued to take it. At first, the doctor started me on one 300 milligram dosage, and I was on one 1 milligram dose of tenazidine daily for my muscle spasms as well. A few months later, I was up to 2 300 milligram capsules a day, and then a year or so later, I was up to 3 a day. It helped me immensely with my nerve pain and depression, and made me able to get out of bed. Before I had taken it, I missed an average of 15 to 25 days a term at school because I was hurting so bad I couldn't get out of bed, climb the stairs, and drive to school. I was so happy I'd finally found something, even though I didn't like that I was dependent on a pill. I went to college in 2009 and was still at 900 milligrams a day. Up to this time, I'd had no problem with refills and had received the meds every day for over a year. Well, my doctor called in the prescriptions to the pharmacy in my hometown, over an hour and a half away from where I was living at the time to go to school. I tried to get it changed, but they screwed it up and it got sent to the right pharmacy, but since it had already been sent to the first, I couldn't pay for it because the insurance wouldn't authorize it twice. I had not had any Neurontin for about 12 to 18 hours at this point because I had run out the night before. I felt completely and totally out of it and could barely move. I felt awful and ended up making the drive back to my hometown to get the prescription. I got to this other pharmacy an hour and 45 minutes away, and the first thing I thought was, I have no idea how the hell I got here. I couldn't remember the drive. I was a zombie. All was well though. I got the script and resumed taking it. Soon my nerve pain came back after a month or two, and I was up to 1200 milligrams a day. I went on like this for another year or so, and it started coming back as my tolerance built. Eventually, I had to up the dose even further and was prescribed 1800 milligrams a day, which I was on for a year or so. Around this time, I discovered the wonders of marijuana and started smoking it. I found the effects to be much more pleasant, but it accomplished all the same things. After a while, when I wasn't smoking weed, my nerve pain would come back with a vengeance some days, so I would take my 3 600 milligram dose plus another half a pill, or I'd take some for my friends or family members and take a couple of their 100 milligrams. Eventually, as this went on, in December 2011, I was abusing my muscle relaxants. At this time, I was on 2 4 milligram doses of tenazidine as well, because as the Neurontin became less effective, my anxiety got out of control. I became addicted to those and was snorting a quarter of a pill every couple of hours, which made them 3 to 4 times more potent. I realized how out of control things were and that gabapentin was no longer working for me. Neither was the tenazidine, and decided to quit all synthetic substances. I weaned myself off the tenazidine over a week or so to little ill effect, but when I tried to wean myself off Neurontin, it took over a month, about 5 weeks. After I quit taking it altogether, I realized there was no way in hell it was worth the relief it gave me. I spent 3 to 4 weeks in bed 95% of the time. I could not talk to people. My social anxiety was at an all-time high. I've never come even close to being that anxious and depressed. I'd see something sad or something that would remind me of the past on TV and start bawling. For the first 2 to 3 weeks, I would cry and shake, but I simply didn't sleep for a week at a time. I wanted to die. I thought about killing myself and almost took up my old habit of self-injury. All I could think about was a razor blade and slicing the fuck out of every part of my body. I was empty and ugly and worthless, and nothing I said meant anything. I couldn't face my family or the world in general. Even in public, I wanted to cry. The few times I went out in public or drove, I had to hide and cry so people wouldn't think I was crazy. My skin felt like it was on fire this entire time, and I was going outside every half hour for a cigarette, trying desperately to ease the withdrawal of this supposedly harmless medication that was not supposed to be addictive. I ended up in the hospital around this time as well because I passed out. I have no idea if it was related at all, but it only fueled my anxiety. My anxiety was there at any minute, and this went on like this for a month. When it got slightly better, it continued for a couple more weeks and got slightly better, and a couple more. And here I am, 7 months after, and I still have some of the same symptoms. They are just under control now. The withdrawal symptoms were severe enough to significantly impede my ability to live for 3 months after going completely off Neurontin, and I still do not sleep like I did before and on Neurontin. I feel like this huge part of me was taken, and I'll never get it back. This medication needs to have a warning about being physically addictive. I've withdrawn off several substances, and I've never had one come even close to this one, especially in duration. I've seen people withdraw off heroin before, and though that is more severe, the duration is much shorter. I'm contemplating contacting a lawyer right now so that they'll have to label it as habit forming. So many people are taking this medication, and they think it's great, but if they ever come off it, they'll see why it's not. The dosage will always increase, and I wasn't even on the maximum dosage approved. There is no way you can win with this drug. The only time I would say to take it is if it's not a daily thing, and it's your only option. If I had not had marijuana and a couple good friends, I would not be writing this. Suicide was the most prevalent thing on my mind the entire time, just to end all of the horrid pain. This is most definitely not a good substance to be on long term, much worse than SSRIs and opiate scripts. I promise you, I've withdrawn off of those, and this is worse, so much worse. The consuming uncertainty isn't worth a little relief. This is my experience on GHB that I would like to share to warn others to be extremely careful when using this drug. I have tried GHB before on several occasions and I found it to be okay, but it does tend to make me nauseous. We had some sitting in the fridge that had been there for ages, and I grabbed it at the last minute on the way out the door for a night out with my best friend. I think there was enough there for 2 hits, 30 milliliters, but I am not entirely sure, so I mixed it with some soda and took it with me. We went to several clubs around town and had a couple of glasses of vodka and orange, as well as some shots of mixed top shelf stuff. As it had been a while since I had taken GHB, I had completely forgotten the rule about not drinking alcohol with it. I returned to my car several times during the night and had mouthfuls of my cola/GHB mixture until it was all gone. By this stage, I was starting to feel very dizzy in my head and things were starting to spin. I could not hold my focus on anything as everything was spinning quite badly. My girlfriend did not know that I had taken the GHB as she is anti-drugs, and I thought that I would be able to remain lucid on the stuff without her knowing how smashed I actually was. By now, she had started to notice that something was wrong with me and kept asking me if I was okay, to which I replied that I was fine. I was still standing at this stage, but when she again asked me if I was okay, all I remember is saying that I was, and then watching as my glass slowly fell to the ground, followed closely by me. What happened next was related to me by my girlfriend because I completely blacked out and have no memory of the next 11 hours until I woke up chained to a hospital bed. Apparently, I fell to the floor, then started vomiting blood. My girlfriend screamed for help and the bouncer came and carried me outside. He kept asking her what I had taken and she repeatedly told him only alcohol because of course I had not told her I was on GHB. The bouncer was convinced that I had taken it as he had seen it many times before and told my girlfriend to just let me sleep it off. My girlfriend, sensing that something was very wrong with me, insisted that the bouncer call an ambulance, but he said there was no need as I would be fine if I slept it off. My girlfriend was near hysterical by now and managed to get him to call one. I was still vomiting and unconscious, and my girlfriend was doing everything to keep me sitting in an upright position. I was trying to hold my tongue because I kept throwing my head back and gagging. Occasionally, I would appear to regain consciousness, but would thrash around wildly, banging my head on the ground until passing out again. I have no memory of this, but had a very sore head and lots of bruises the next day. Finally, the ambulance came and they took one look at me and rushed me straight to the hospital on life support. During the trip in, I stopped breathing several times and had to be resuscitated. When I got to the hospital, I was hooked up to all sorts of machines, had a tube down my throat, in my nose, and a drip in each arm. The doctors told me later that every time they tried to bring me around, I had a seizure and would thrash around so uncontrollably that I eventually had to be restrained to my bed. I was admitted to hospital at approximately 1:30 a.m. and did not regain consciousness until 11 a.m. the next day. The doctors also told me that had it not been for the actions of my girlfriend, I would more than likely have died before the ambulance arrived. My girlfriend's mom is a doctor, so she knew all about putting people in the recovery position, etc. But on this occasion, she knew that if she put me in the recovery position and let me sleep it off as the bouncer had advised, that I would have choked on my vomit. She listened to her instinct rather than the advice given. I have fully recovered from that night and have vowed to never take GHB again because of its unpredictability with getting the dose right. I still use recreational drugs, just not that one. My final comment is, to anyone out there who takes GHB or knows people who do, please do not let them sleep off an overdose. Get medical help quickly and keep them sitting up so as to not choke if they vomit. Do not listen to the advice out there about sleeping it off. It could mean the difference between life and death.